In previous videos, I have discussed my perspective on John Searle's Chinese room thought experiment, which is one of the best known arguments against the possibility of truly intelligent machines. After reviewing my work, I have recognized that my informal tone may have caused some difficulty in the understanding of my ideas. Therefore, in this video, I will rephrase my position using an existing field of study known as signal theory. Before exploring my position, I want to consider what led me to develop my argument in the first place, as many replies to the Chinese room already exist. In short, I wanted to develop a reply that John Searle himself could accept, as he had rejected many of the existing replies in his landmark paper, Mind, Brains, and Programs. To do this, I first had to carefully consider the characteristics that such a reply would have. Searle tacitly describes his guidelines in the bottom statement, which he made in his landmark paper. Essentially, Searle would only be satisfied with an argument that demonstrates that a man within a Chinese room-like situation, where English translations of Chinese characters are not available, can experience some of the semantic content of Chinese characters. With these guidelines, I set out to develop this ideal reply. After some thinking, I believe I have fulfilled Searle's criteria with a new argument based in signal theory, the specifics of which I will discuss now. Let me begin by providing a brief introduction to Lewis signaling games, which were developed by the philosopher David Lewis. Lewis's first example of a signaling game represents the situation outlined in Longfellow's poem Paul Revere's Ride. In short, the sexton of the Old North Church would keep watch for British troops, and if spotted, would signal Paul Revere using 1 or 2 lanterns. In terms of a signaling game, it can be stated that both the Chinese and non-Chinese speakers have admissible contingency plans which guide their behavior. The Chinese speaker's ACP translates information states into signals, while the non-Chinese speakers translate signals into actions. While the non-Chinese speaker's ACP is a physical instruction book, the Chinese speaker's ACP is entirely mental. Having framed the Chinese room using signal theory, I now need to return to Searle's criteria, specifically the second half. In terms of signal theory, how can I demonstrate that any individual is experiencing the semantic content of Chinese characters? In other words, how can I test intentionality? One technique I have considered is this. Suppose I were to randomly select 2 questions and then ask the non-Chinese speaker if they shared the same information states. If, on average, the non-Chinese speaker is able to answer my questions with close to 100% accuracy without the Chinese speaker's ACP, I argue that he is experiencing the semantic content of Chinese characters. I hold this position because semantic information states are not themselves observable, and so the only way to really characterize them is through the signals they are assigned to. If someone were to ask you to prove your semantic experience of the question, "What is your age?" you really could only reply with a semantically equivalent phrase, such as, "How old are you?" Returning to the Chinese room, recall that the only tool at the non-Chinese speaker's disposal is his ACP. In this situation Searle has created, it seems impossible for the non-Chinese speaker to pass my test with close to 100% accuracy, as responses do not always correlate with the semantic data underlying questions. For example, consider the 2 signals, "What is your age?" and 5 + 5. While these questions do not share the same information states, they do share the same responses. The non-Chinese speaker, using his ACP, would falsely conclude that the 2 signals must share the same information states. So Searle's Chinese room may not be conducive to the successful completion of my intentionality test. Therefore, I will have to slightly modify the room while still maintaining Searle's criteria, specifically the part about having no English translations. This is the modified Chinese room, which is different from Searle's description in 2 ways. First, instead of outputting responses, the non-Chinese speaker now outputs numbers. Second, the connections on the non-Chinese speaker's ACP have been rewired to mirror the connections of the Chinese speaker's ACP. Notice how none of these changes contradict Searle's criteria. Together, these two rather simple changes enable the non-Chinese speaker to easily pass my test. For example, if I asked the non-Chinese speaker whether question B and question E shared the same information state, he would correctly answer yes, because his ACP mirrors the Chinese speaker's ACP. Because of this, I argue that my modified Chinese room is the ideal Chinese room reply, because it fulfills all of Searle's criteria. I have demonstrated that an intentional being in a formal program does develop additional intentionality. So does this mean that Searle's conclusion is incorrect? That strong AI must exist? This is not the intent of my argument. By disproving the Chinese room, I have only shown that strong AI might exist. In the future, another argument may arise against strong AI that even the ideal Chinese room cannot combat. But till then, let us ponder the possibilities of a world where machines and men stand as equals. Thank you for watching.